I'm not here till 8:30.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hillsborough Township Planning Board meeting of September 4th, 2025. Please join me in a salute to the flag. Please be advised this meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, otherwise known as Sunshine Law. Notice of the 2025 annual meeting schedule has been provided to the officially designated newspapers. The Township Clerk posted on the Township's website and available here at the Hillsborough Township Municipal Complex. In addition, application documents and plans have been made available on the Township Civic Clerk website at least 10 days in advance of this evening's meeting. Complete application files are available in the Planning and Zoning Department for inspections in accordance with the public meetings notice. With that, may I have a roll call of Planning Board members and also Board and Township professionals, please?
Mr. Radowitz, Mr. Vitale, Mr. Deb, and Mr. Smith are absent. Mr. Wagner? Here. Mr. Flagg? Here. Ms. Smith?
Here.
Committeeman Lapani?
Present.
Mayor Ciccarelli?
Here.
Mr. Peason?
Here.
Chair Sarachi?
Here.
Mr. Coyce?
Present.
Paul?
Here.
Mr. Bernstein?
Here.
Mr. Mayhew?
Here.
And myself and the videographer are here.
Okay.
You got
Bless you and welcome, everybody. Okay, we do not have meeting minutes for consideration. We do have a couple resolutions for consideration. First one is M&M Realty Partners, Hillsborough LLC, the West Track with a file number of 21-PB-16-MSV.
Eligible members are Mr. Flagg, Committeeman Lapani, Mayor Ciccarelli, Mr. Peason, and the chair.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Flagg? Committeeman Lapani?
Yes.
Mayor Ciccarelli?
Yes.
Vice Chair Peason?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes. Next, Connie International, Inc., file 24-PB-04-SPV.
Same five.
Same five.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Discussion from the dais. Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Flagg?
Yes.
Committeeman Lapani?
Yes.
Mayor Ciccarelli?
Yes.
Vice Chair Peason?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes.
They were heard both on the same night, Mayor.
Okay, we do not have any planning board business nor consideration of ordinances, so we will go to business from the floor for matters that are not in this evening's agenda. If you would like to provide comment to the planning board, please come up, state your name and address for the record, please.
David Brook, Winding Way. It feels like it's been so long since I've been here, and thank you. I wanted to ask a question about process for the affordable housing matter, I guess for lack of a better term. We know the township said 223, the state says 565. And I guess my question, at least the first one, is how does that get decided with regards to what the actual number is, the target that the town is shooting, the town is required to construct or be involved with?
You want to provide the Cliff Notes?
I could say that if you flip a coin and that's about the number at the moment of 565 has been established by the court. The township has appealed it to the appellate division, and we are in the process of the briefing schedule. We have submitted ours being the townships. We await the filing of Fair Share Housing and possibly one or two other parties. In terms of the 223, that is what we believe we are obligated in accordance with the 2024 law. In addition to the credits, we will see as the process moves along how we do accordingly.
Along that vein, challenges to the plan. We heard about this from July through August.
There
think-
were.
And we all know there were, I guess. Right? Is the proper number 9 or 11? I don't know. Is it timely? Is it not? That's something
12.
for the courts, I guess. Sorry.
12.
12. Okay, fine. So what's 1 or 2 here or there? So again, just process. If it's at the appellate division, how does the trial level address those 12 that you're talking about? Do they wait for the number, or do they just start? How's that scheduled, if you could try to explain, just so I understand?
According to the laws passed last year, the issue is supposed to be addressed and purportedly resolved by the end of the year. That's what the legislation says.
So in other words, by the court, those 12 do
The program will be dealing with the objections as they dealt with the numbers, with recommendations to the Mount Laurel judge, who is Judge Menon, and then ultimately His Honor will make a decision or decisions depending upon what's before him.
Does the township have the opportunity to chime in on that other side of each of those 12?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Yes, okay.
A
And
busy next 4 months.
the other question is more a matter of, I guess, conceptual, and maybe it goes to the planner, maybe it goes to all of you. But based upon at least some of the challenges, it seems like we are almost getting more and more sprawl. And I guess my question is there not the opportunity to try to concentrate the construction of these housing units, including affordable, in the town center where we already have development that could be redeveloped? We know the ShopRite is going bye-bye, at least down the street. There's no discussion with regards to what's going to happen there. Is there any role that the township planner, committee, planning board can play in trying to sort of direct the units there?
It'll be part of the process, but remember that the people who are objecting want it built on the property they own.
I completely understand that. I guess I was just wondering whether the township can play a role in trying to promote the development in the places where we would like to have it, as opposed to
Well,
the sprawl.
I guess I'll just say it's where you might like it.
Yeah.
I'm
So
sorry.
that might be where you might like it, not where maybe it makes best sense for the township. So without going too deep into the weeds, Mr. Bernstein, it is a process that we're looking at ongoing, and we have to go in front of the courts. And if you think it's going to be done by the 31st of December, buy a lottery ticket. It's not going to get done.
We're all buying
and that-
lottery tickets.
Yeah. But
By the
thank
way,
you for your
if we win it, then
question.
you don't have to worry about these problems.
That's true. So then the other last kind of question, if I may, so when you look at the challenges, for those who may not have seen them, if you do the numbers, there's apparently proposals for 1,002 units just on Homestead Road. And so if we don't do something, or if we do something with this gentleman here and his applicant, right, is there some guiding force that says 1,000 units on Homestead Road, 1,002 units on Homestead Road is not in the best interest of the township? Or how does that play out?
On advice of counsel, we won't respond. We'll deal with it as part of the process.
Spoken like a true
Attorney.
diplomat.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none. We're going to move on to tonight's public hearing. Homestead Road LLC, file number 21-PB-25-MS/MSPV. Time, this is not correct. I think the time of
September
decision
30th.
is September 30th of this
Yes,
year.
it should be September 30th, folks,
And
while they're going down 2 by 2 down the road.
What
Okay.
needs to be adjusted?
What?
A date needs to be adjusted?
I can't hear you, Samantha, over the...
Is there a date that needs to be adjusted?
Yes, the date on the agenda says 7:31. It was changed to 9:30.
Okay.
Yep.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
Okay. So block 200, dot 10, lot 3233, commonly known as 203 Homestead Road and 189 Homestead Road. I don't think I need to read all of this. This is an application I think everyone is well aware of that's continued from July 10th of 2025 without further notice. And do we need to have everyone introduce
Well,
themselves? Because I'm
Since
think we're-
Mr. Giannetti felt the need to come up, I assume everybody else feels the need to come up, or at least get close enough to a mic. Place your name and representation on the record.
Good evening, Chairman, Mayor, members of the board. Craig Giannetti, the law firm Dave Pitney, on behalf of the applicant Homestead Road LLC.
Good evening, Mike Pissarro, Policy Director for the Watershed Institute.
Good evening, Brian Tarantino representing SWAT.
Good evening, Scott Gross, Local Citizens Against Traffic.
John Lanahan, Objector 4.
Lori Cleveland for the Sourland Conservancy.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Mr. Bernstein.
Mr. Chairman, at the conclusion of the July 10th, 2025 meeting, the board closed all public comment. Everyone had their closing arguments to make for and against the application. And what we are here for this evening is board deliberation. Anyone want to disagree? This is the moment.
I would maybe add and vote at the end.
No, this is it. Hearing none.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, it is now within the hands of the board to review or to go over on the record what I believe all of you have been doing for the last few weeks, which is reading and rereading and looking at exhibits and testimony and the like regarding a number of issues that were raised, including in opinion letters provided to you by both Mr. Mayu and Mr. Coyce. And I think at this point, Mr. Chairman, you might want to start how you want to see this progress.
Okay. I think we're going to first start with our professionals to review their summary reports or memos, specifically focused on, let's see, well, what's the right term? You say items that are not satisfied, open items, any areas that the applicant's seeking relief. And then we will move along from there, to the board members, but I have a feeling this first part may take a little bit of time. So who wants to go first? I see Mr. Mayhew's pointing fingers.
Don't immediately run into the middle, folks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Coyce and Mr. Chairman. I would bring the board's attention to a Pannoni review letter dated 28 August 2025. The letter addresses, as you said, Mr. Chairman, items that our office believe have not been satisfied. Over the course of this application, several review letters have been generated. This is labeled number 8. Issues that have been substantially satisfied in prior review letters in order to decrease the amount of printing have been removed from the review letter. So we're left with items that our office believe are not satisfied, or items that either are ongoing issues or issues that the applicant in their last submittal agreed that they would, as a condition, if a condition of approval was granted, they agreed that they would address them. I'd be pleased to point out a few maybe of the more pertinent items that we've identified as not satisfied, if that would be the board's pleasure.
Yeah, please do.
I'll bring your attention to the first one, page 2, under wastewater management, item number 1. It's our opinion that capacity has not been reserved or created for additional flow, specifically for this site, and that if there was ever any consideration of approval, this additional flow would have to be addressed. Under item 2, also under wastewater management, the applicant's proposing a substantial water main extension through Homestead Road, which would create a trench in the pavement. And if there any approval was considered, our office believes it should be the applicant's obligation to repair the road properly. Continuing on page 2, under stormwater management, we believe that the applicant has not satisfied a couple stormwater sections, specifically section 262-4.d as in Delta. We believe the increase in volume of runoff from the site between the pre-developed and proposed developed conditions has not been minimized. And we point out some substantial increases utilizing the applicant's calculations, identifying the increase in runoff for different storm events. Continuing on page 3, we believe that Hillsborough Code 262-4.b as in Bravo has not been addressed. That section requires runoff to be released in a manner so as not to overload existing drainage systems, create flooding, or create a need for additional drainage facilities. We believe due to the greatly proposed increase in runoff from the site that there would be requirements downstream to address that increase in flow. And as exhibits to the review letter, we've included some information on the existing flooding that occurs downstream and the impact to some of the local roads downstream. Continuing on page 3, second from the bottom paragraph, we believe the applicant has not addressed Township Code 188-64D as in Delta, 1B as in Bravo, which requires applicants to protect significant ecological components of stream corridors such as wetlands, floodplains, woodlands, wildlife and plant life habitats within stream corridors. Within those paragraphs, we mention how the applicant's proposing to divert existing runoff from some of the Royce Brook tributaries and redirect it into storm pipes and into detention basins, therefore bypassing significant sections of the existing tributaries, which would lead to a decrease of groundwater, surface water, and then impact specifically the wetlands along those tributaries. On page 4, under the similar section of the ordinance, we believe section 188-64D as in Delta has not been met. We believe the applicant has not maintained the quality of the Royce Brook tributaries, as I mentioned before, due to diversions of flow. I turn your attention to page 5, the top paragraph, which is labeled number 9. We believe sections of Hillsborough Code 262-10.c as in Charlie 3 has not been met. We have concerns over the large detention basin behind warehouse number 1 that has significant retaining walls surrounding the perimeter of the basin, which would provide difficulty for people who might be in that basin at the time of flooding events. Continuing on page 5, if you move to the traffic section, under paragraph 1, or comment 1, I'm sorry, we believe the applicant has not satisfied section 188-67. We don't believe the applicant has adequately identified the projected truck traffic. We've heard testimony from the applicant's expert and also from objectors' experts. We've reviewed the applicant's submitted documents and believe that there has not been a clear correlation or presentation of what the projected truck traffic may be for the warehouses. On page 6, still under traffic, we believe comment 9 has not been satisfied. We were looking for left-hand turn warrants, which are calculations to demonstrate whether left-hand turn lanes are necessary on Homestead Road. Those would be on the eastbound lanes to provide an area for trucks or other vehicles to wait for appropriate turning into the proposed driveways, and no calculations were submitted. If I continue under that same page, comment number 10, if any consideration of approval was to be granted, our office would like additional analysis be provided on the bridge over CXX. It's the only road, since there's a weight limit on Willow Road, the only approach to the proposed warehouses would be on Homestead Road from 206, and the trucks would have to cross the CSX bridge. And as that's the only approach, we would want to make sure that prior to construction, it was demonstrated that this bridge could handle the projected traffic. If I continue on to page 7, I'll bring your attention to Stream Corridor Protection Section 188-64D as in Delta. Has been demonstrated in correspondence from our office in the past. We believe the water feature running through Warehouse 1 from the Royce Brook tributary meets the definition of a stream per the Hillsborough Code, and therefore would have a stream corridor buffer associated. I bring your attention to the Hillsborough Code 188-64, D as in Delta, 3E as in Echo. That section discusses prohibited activities within a stream and corridor, and some of those prohibited activities are parking lots, driveways, and buildings, which the current application proposes to construct within the corridor. The code's very specific that a variance would have to be issued in order to allow that work. There are other stream corridor encroachments, and the board would have to make a decision whether those could be granted. There's, under the stream corridor section, I mentioned E, which talks about prohibited activities. If you move up one category to D as in Delta, the ordinance provides waivers for activities that, if denied, would be a hardship. And then one category above that is C as in Charlie. It grants the board the ability to grant waivers for activities that are reasonable. So the board will have to decide about the other proposed encroachments. There are 2 driveways for warehouse number 2 that cross the stream corridor, and there are 2 detention basins that have outfalls impacting the corridor. Moving on to page 8, there's a section on the Transitional Economic Development District, which is known as Code 188-107.2. The first area that our office believes has not been satisfied is, won't read the whole, so I'm going to read several of these sections, and they all start off 188-107.2. Under F as in Foxtrot, 1B as in Bravo 6, the code requires the development to provide a network of sidewalk and pedestrian connections to adjoining sites and adjoining roadways and linkages to the surrounding areas. Our office believes that this has not been accomplished. Under F1B3A of that same code section, the code talks about limiting the curb cut opening on Homestead Road. It talks about limiting the opening to 25 feet. The applicant proposes 110 to 125 foot widths, which are significantly greater than the code allows. The applicant has discussed about having safe turning radiuses on these openings. Our office would certainly want to review and approve appropriate openings. We believe the code's intent was to limit the throat opening to provide a safe and efficient way for pedestrians and bicyclists to cross that opening, which is an impact area with motor vehicles. And we believe that an order of magnitude of 4 is a significant increase. Under the same code section, item D as in Delta, parentheses 1, we believe the proposed and required landscape buffers do not meet the ordinance requirement. Part of the reason is the two warehouses are on significant elevation areas of the site. They're higher than the surrounding residential areas. In our opinion, the proposed plantings will not have a significant buffering impact on the buildings, and therefore does not satisfy that section. Turn to page 9, under that same code section, subsection F as in Foxtrot, 1A1, we believe the proposed warehouses and site improvements do not minimize the changes to existing topography and therefore do not meet this section of the code. The applicant's proposing significant grade changes over significant lengths, and he's accomplishing this with significant amount of retaining walls, which we have an exhibit attached to our review letter. Some of these walls are 16 feet tall. There's over 4,500 linear feet of wall proposed, and most of these walls are proposed at the limits of disturbance. So rather than transitioning into the existing grade, there's an abrupt change at the extents. If any approval was considered at some point, our office would strongly suggest that some of these retaining walls be tiered to minimize impacts, safety impacts of someone falling off the wall. And we would suggest something like a maximum of 7-foot high wall and say a 5-foot terraced area between the tiered walls. If you continue on the same page down to comment 8, and still in the same section, subsection F as in Foxtrot 6, we do not believe the loading and storage areas have been adequately buffered. The applicant is proposing a retaining wall and an aesthetic wall, we'll say. At the rear, warehouse number 1, there's an existing proposed, I don't want to say existing, on the plans there's a proposed 14-foot high retaining wall between the parking area and the detention basin. In order to provide a buffer, the applicant's proposing a 14-foot high wall on top of the retaining wall. So you'd end up with looking at a 28-foot tall wall. We do not believe this meets the intent of the ordinance or the buffer requirements. If I'm still on page 9, comment number 9, and refer you to Hillsborough Code 188-107.2.B as in Bravo. It talks about permitted uses should be of a scale and size appropriate for the district. There's been a lot of discussion about how to quantify, is a use appropriate scale and size? And the applicant has discussed impervious cover and other bulk standards. We believe an additional appropriate standard to look at and parameter is the amount of truck traffic that a use would generate. And using ITE numbers, as the applicant is suggesting, they're proposing approximately 322 truck trips a day from this site. To put that in context, the applicant did a traffic study and says there's about 16 trips per day on Homestead Road. So they're proposing 20 more times the existing trips on the roadway. In our opinion, this is not an appropriate scale for the site in relationship to the residential to the east and the existing LI to the west. I turn to page 10. We begin comments addressing landscape, lighting, and sound. If you go to comment number 4, it talks about providing buffers for material which to be stored outside. In our opinion, tractor trailers that are not attached to the tractor are just simply trailers and could be considered they're being stored outdoors, and they would need appropriate buffer. And as discussed earlier, in our opinion, the buffers are not satisfactory and do not provide the required buffering from the residential sites. Some of it's because of the great change in elevation between the residential areas and the site. And also, there's some existing deciduous vegetation, which during the winter will not provide the appropriate buffering. And if you go at the bottom of that page 10, comment number 5 talks about code section 160-5.e as an echo parentheses 3. In our opinion, and a sound impact study has not been included, and the noise impact to the surrounding site has not been demonstrated to be addressed. And we believe the applicant has not met that section of the code. Attached to our letter, Mr. Chairman, were several exhibits to help explain some of the reasons we believe items were not satisfied, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, for purposes of the record, Mr. Mayu, there were 2 other not satisfied items in your report. First one on page 1, or page 2, I believe, at the top, under general comments.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. That's comment on page 2, general comments, item number 1. In our opinion, the applicant has not demonstrated or not provided clear understanding for us as to what the proposed use of the buildings are intended for. And I'm sorry, Mr. Bernstein, where's the other?
And that's on bottom of page 8, top of page 9, I believe. And that relates to, last 2 lines on page 8 and into page 9. That's the noise and the orientation.
Thank you. Yes, so this is page 8, the very bottom, comment number 4. This is under the TECD district, which is code 188-107.2. In our opinion, the applicant hasn't demonstrated that they've looked at other alternative orientations, nor have they necessarily provided the best orientation for the township and adjoiners. We haven't heard any testimony as to why the buildings couldn't be turned maybe 90 degrees or even 180 degrees in order to turn, which is probably the largest noise generating area of the site will be the loading areas. And as of now, the loading areas are, for Warehouse 1, are directed towards the residential units. And we believe that turning it 90 degrees at least would generate that noise westward. Or there could even be consideration turning it 180 degrees and generate the noise towards the agricultural district. So we don't believe that item has been satisfied. Thank you, Mr. Bernstein.
Thank you, Mr. Magan. You want to hear from Mr. Coyce next?
Squires, you're up.
Thank you. So some of the areas I wanted to touch on this evening related to the report that I issued on April 2nd, 2025. I wanted to start with the size and scale. Section 188-107.2 of the ordinance states that all uses shall be provided at a scale and size that is appropriate for the district. I wanted to point out that, during the 2010 master plan, the intent of the TCD zone was to encourage the development of employment areas near residential neighborhoods with the design that assures the peace and solitude of the residents. When it came to looking at what they considered intense uses, it needs to be pointed out that warehousing, shipping, and receiving was not identified as a potential high-intensity use that would generate concerns like the other uses that are identified. It should also be acknowledged that within the code, there is no specific definition related to what warehousing, shipping, and receiving is. As we have learned, warehousing has evolved, and some of the concerns that we also have is that the use proposed has been described in a very generic way. No specific use, no specific tenant has been identified. I could say from an administrative standpoint, if the applicant came in for a zoning permit, we wouldn't have enough information to issue them a zoning permit to say, hey, yeah, this is the use that you can have. Yes, you have provided enough information for us to understand what you are looking to do there. So right now, there's not enough information for us to make a determination just coming to issuing a zoning permit. Are there other uses that the TCD zone has? Yeah, and each one would be evaluated as they would come in. But when it comes to this use, the applicant has indicated that it will not be a parcel delivery hub, a fulfillment center, or a transload warehouse. They've provided multiple examples of what the facility will not be, yet continues to call it a warehouse in name. Again, someone could keep calling a use by a name, and what we have to start doing, or to do as a result from that, is start asking the questions. Okay, at what point is a warehouse no longer a warehouse? So I've laid out some guidance for the board to consider that, and to look at what the intent of the master plan was. And when we also start to look at the intensity that's being proposed when it comes to the size, the number of loading docks, the site is overparked by 61, it's overloaded by 69. It has accessory trailer parking that's proposed that's nothing like currently exists in Hillsborough. Those are all the types of things that start to make me, as a professional planner, concerned as to what is this use? Is this use really a traditional warehouse, in which I believe was the intent of the planning board and the township committee had when it was a principal permitted use? In totality, this is a use that, in my professional opinion, is beyond the size and scale that the township had anticipated, And although there has been some discussion that there are regulations that were not included to further limit certain sizes and things like that, it's absolutely essential to point out that a provision was still put into the TCD, as I first started out saying, that it is a requirement that the development has to be at the appropriate size and scale. Let's see here. So the proposed size and scale leads me to the conclusion that the proposed use is not a standard warehouse that the Hillsborough Township Master Plan anticipated or that the code permits. Therefore, the applicant has not adequately demonstrated that the proposed development is at a scale and size that is appropriate for the district or permitted by the township code. I believe Mr. Mayhew, just so that we're not repeating, touched upon other parts already that were also in my memo. I believe that's everything I wanted to highlight. Unless Mr. Bernstein has a...
I'll let you start.
I'll be the first to go, since this appears to be I'm the old man on the board. So, first off, we're going to have a lot of conversations here, so I'm going to ask the public to keep quiet through the proceedings because we do have someone taking recordings here. So I would ask everybody just to remain silent through the whole process. As I was starting to read this 2.5 years of testimony, I started to realize how long this is that I was actually mayor. We've had 3 different engineers through Pannoni, 2 different planners, and 5 members of the board who aren't even on the board anymore. So you can appreciate the time that was given to this application and to the public to make sure all the testimony was given to give it the fair shake that it deserves. Because I believe it was Mr. Lanahan that stated in his testimony, if you own a piece of property, you have the right to develop it. But the planning board is here to decide if it fits the purpose, and that's what we're here for today. So I'm going to start off. Obviously, the planners have given some of their things to talk about, but in 188-2, which nobody talked about, because I became very familiar with our land use, even though I've been doing this for 2 years, liar 20. But states basically a purpose of why we bring applications to the planning board. And one of the sentences I'm going to read, it's halfway down the paragraph, is to regulate the bulk, height, number of stories, size of buildings, and other structures, avoid a conflict with the development and general welfare of neighboring municipalities, the county, the state, establish appropriate population density, concentrations, contributing to the well-being of persons, neighborhoods, communities, and regions, and the preservation of the environment. Also, discourage the location with regard to traffic of such facilities and routes which result in congestion of blight and promote desirable visual environment and open space for the community. So this is kind of the charge of what the planning board takes into a decision amongst all the things that we have. And I have to say, this is, of all the 20 years I've been here, this is probably the most complex application I've ever been a part of. But I go back to, and my question to the board is, the applicant has been insistent that it meets all the bulk variances, but the only reason it meets the bulk variances because of the lot line change. If they didn't get the lot line change, they couldn't put this big building on it, or even if they didn't move the lot line so far to the, I think that's the east, on the other side of the wetlands, to take advantage of all the open space they can't build on, then they probably wouldn't be able to fit this building in and meet all the bulk criteria. because the lot line would have to be moved over to the other side, and then they wouldn't meet the side buffers, they wouldn't meet the impervious, they wouldn't meet all the other things that they were able to do by moving the lot line out so far away that they could take a building of this size, stick it in the middle, and meet the criteria. So, in my opinion, what we're talking about here is they're trying to make a lot big enough out of 2 lots and use wasted area that we know we can't build on, but make it a parameter that allows them to put a building on the size that they did. So obviously, if the lot line wasn't there, they couldn't put nearly the size of this building that would be here, though they have the ability to ask for it. But in granting that lot line or not granting that lot line, this whole building would not be able to be built in the size and scale that they're asking for. So that part of that is kind of disingenuous to me because, yeah, they're able to fit it in there, but most of the time those bulk variances are designed to put an orientation of a building on a piece of property that is not nearly as big, but they don't want it right next to the neighbor's property, or they don't want it over impervious. And also with respects to the TEDZ zone, in all due respect, I don't think they had envisioned in coming up with the bicycle paths, the walkways, a campus-type environment, one big monolithic building and then some walkways around it to satisfy the statute of asking for a walkway. I think they've envisioned maybe a couple small buildings with some common space, some green space, a nice campus, so to speak. So again, just putting in some sidewalks around the building to quote-unquote satisfy the code, to me, does not, in my opinion, in the spirit of the TEC zone, satisfy it. So I'll start with those conversations, and the board can add to those conversations if you want, and then we'll try to maybe take each section maybe at a time as to try and keep the testimonies together before I get into or talk about some of the other engineerings and things. But just that in general, the reason why we see these plans, though they may meet the naked eye, the bulk variances, I think that the size and scope, which we've said probably 1,000 times in the last 2.5 years, is really what I'm struggling with here.
I guess I'll kind of continue to, I think, where you started off reading our ordinance and thinking of, trying to put that more, I'm going to call into my own layman's terms, is I'm going to use my car tire analogy. You know where I'm going with it. So there was a lot of discussions about what meets, zoning requirements. So, it conforms, but, there's a whole element of what the master plan vision is and intention. So the way I kind of look at it is everyone has a car and you go get new tires, right? What's the first thing they ask you? What size tire? To me, that's the zone. You want to make sure you get the right tire or the size tire to fit on your car. But then the next question is what type of tire? It's kind of the tread. What are you planning on traveling in? To me, that's the master plan. That's the vision. Are you going to race the car? You're going to go up to the Rocky Mountains through snow and stuff, off-roading. So even though there's a lot of tires out there that will fit your car, you got to kind of know what the purpose of that is. What kind of tread do you want on it? And that's the kind of what I'm looking at this is not only does it just have to fit, but is it going to carry you to the mission? So that was my layman's term on that. What's that?
You're the car guy.
I'm the car guy. So that's the way I'm kind of looking. I look at any applications going forward like that. It's And I think it may have been touched upon, maybe Mr. Coyce was touching upon it. Well, and I guess it was touched upon during some of the testimony, was, what's the right term? The infamous checklist. It was no, the satisfied. Completeness, that's it. Boy, I knew it was a C word somewhere out there. So, again, just because, applicant, it gets deemed complete, it doesn't mean that the planning board doesn't have the oversight to decide whether or not it meets, the requirements of the master plan, zoning, because if it did, there'd be no purpose of the planning board, then, the planner could just then sign off immediately. So, no disrespect. So I know that there was some of that argument out there, and again, it doesn't mean that it may or may not be, it may be, appropriate. We still have to evaluate that for all intents and purposes. So, trying to see where I want to go with this next, but I guess, the way, a lot of testimony was being portrayed or being provided was this was going to be automatic. There was nothing to dispute. I think, again, Mr. Lapani was going through there, part of some of that vision. So one of the interesting things, and, usually a lot of judiciary bodies, quasi-judiciary, sometimes don't have the benefit of knowing what those who had passed legislation in the past, what they were thinking of. Here, this board doesn't have that necessarily. Yes, I'm looking at you, Mr. Wagner, because as Mr. Coy said, back in another era, there was a couple of us here that actually were the ones that, did the master plan amendment and actually developed and voted on and passed the the ordinance in question. Actually, we had one other member, and he was one of the ones that started on this, and he's left town, so. But, and then actually, we have a fourth one in the building, Administrator Ferrero was with us. So, one of the things I know, I had raised a question with Mr. Dean, and I think, sorry, you may even ask some along that line with Ms. Cafone, is whether or not I had reached out to anyone that may have been involved in that, and clearly there wasn't at that. So, and so I can provide, some of the insight in there, and, Mr. Wagner, you can jump in.
Well, now I feel very old that you pointed that out, because that goes back.
Well, you are a month older than me, so.
Yeah, but it goes back a long time ago to what the intent of that zone was. And you're right, Chairman, this was, when you used your analogy of the tire to kind of put it in layman's terms so people can kind of relate to it. I mean, I don't know what else you can really say about it. The intent of what the zone was when we went back and did that was a transitional zone. When you think of a transitional, it's, kind of a transition. How else do you describe it? Not, going from a single-family home to a huge, 3-story, 2-building warehouse type thing. So, that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, that zone was originally our old CDZ zone. It was a corporate development zone. Interesting enough, it had minimum 50-acre zoning, but the reason why that wound up not occurring, or why we had to revisit that, was there was, for folks that know some history here, know that there were a couple of proposed major highways to go through there. Ironically, if they had gone through, who knows what would have been built there. This application may have come up a long time ago at that point, but no, it just seemed it was indefensible at that time. And so, we looked back at that zone as to what we wanted in there. A lot of the land there had started to be preserved, so that's where the genesis of this transitional zone was starting to come through. Interesting enough, you're looking at the list of what was approved, some of the stuff that you would have thought, oh, why not any retail in there? Well, because at the time, we were also working on our Main Street concepts. Obviously, you don't want to be cannibalizing, that area. So that's why some of those areas were excluded. So, and I'm going to ask Mr. Wagner to jump in as if my memory has faded. But I know that, the topic was about warehouse and how it stood alone. But if you notice in there, it said warehouse and then comma, shipping, receiving. As we know, a lot of businesses, businesses may have detached shipping, receiving, warehouse areas to help their businesses to store product. They're not generally fully enclosed. So that was, from my recollection, the reason why that was sort of just stood along as an approved use versus an accessory use. So that didn't create any type of conflict, but I guess,
Yeah, I think that was the intent. You have businesses, people have stuff that come in, things come in, things go out. Any business has those. When you look at the concept of what we have here, it's, can't else describe it, you have the warehouse. That's not the intent of, in my opinion, of what the zone was originally established for. So,
If I might, when it comes to the transition, Mr. Wagner, you said residential and then this warehouse. I actually looked at it from the other direction, right? We're going from the light industrial zone that's west of the bypass and the trains and this property, transitioning to the residential. So, I don't know, you do math, you can do a curve. If this is intensity of the light industrial zone, you would expect it to go down to residential. And then there was a lot of questions about intensity and how it's measured, and we could talk about that a little bit. But rather than coming down, it goes up like that. And I just don't think that was the intent, as you described, of the transition. The transition should have been smoothed down to a residential area. I think a lot of the comments that were in the Pannoni report are rooted in the fact that it's not suited, the project is probably not suited for a TECD zone. And when the TECD zone was developed, you had 2 lots that were, at least on that side of the road. And if it was 1 lot that was the size of how they're proposing to change it, you might not have called it a TECD zone. So you may have called it ag or RA or something else. So you had something in mind, and I want to put that in your head. You can confirm it or deny it, but the size of those properties dictated now how you develop the TECD zone. By changing the lot line, that it exposes that zone to all these other inconsistencies and problems that, according to Pannoni, are not satisfied right now, and size and scale issues that Mr. Coyce cited. So I think the transition from what the light industrial is, and again, we can talk about intensity and how it was measured here. I think that's like flipping what Bob had said. Like it still comes to the fact that you have a large warehouse now right next to residential, as opposed to something that's in between what was on the other side of the railroad tracks and the residential. So.
I agree with, your thoughts have been the same as my thoughts. I've struggled all along with the sense of taking the word transitional, it's an in-between stage. What we have here is not in between. What we have here is not in between light industrial and residential. You're having now increased tractor-trailer traffic. That's nothing to just dismiss and say, well, that's nothing. That's only because it's a substantial increase. Now you're talking noise, you're talking pollution, you're talking an effect on people's lives every day. It's not just occasionally. It's an everyday wearing down of people's happiness, in my opinion. And the pollution as well. Again, this is not, the term transitional is just that. And I don't believe that these 2 buildings fit that criteria.
guess I'll jump in a little bit, just to stay on that subject of the TECD zone, that it should be transitional. I've been on this board for quite a few years, and when I first got on, I asked, why don't we just make all the zones what everybody wants? Let's just make pretty much everything agricultural, and where the houses are, just make those houses and then get rid of all the other residential. We can stop any future residential. Nobody wants more houses put in. And the response was, yeah, it doesn't work that way. You own a piece of property, you have a right to develop that property, you have a right to build on it, you have a right to do what is allowed in that zone for that property. So I concur with my colleagues. I think the transitional is the word. Size and scope, I don't think fits in the TECD district. If you
I'm
wanna
just going to add.
Go on to traffic, or?
No, well, no, I got a few more things to say. So, but in fairness, we had to take everything into consideration. I was waiting to hear for someone, for testimony to convince me, otherwise, that maybe there was something we had overlooked. Didn't see that. Like I said, I think there were opportunities Ms. Cofone did have. I think she avoided much discussion with regards to the master plan, kept emphasizing the zone, that it fit the zone, cited, I think, parts of the MLUL as reasons, but avoided discussion of the master plan on that. So I think, those, did reinforce, I think, what, we had recalled as to the original intent of that area. And just even looking at the amendment, I think it was brought up by Mr. Mayhew, talking about, pedestrian and bicycles access. I mean, in the amendment, we specifically, stated out that pedestrian bicycle access should be encouraged and parking areas should be screened from adjoining residential existing dwellings. So right there was a vision that this was going to be pedestrian-friendly, bicycle, that people could get to it without their cars, that there was going to be economic benefits to them, by just taking a walk over there. Because I think, we had farm stand or something, similar, in there as an approved use. One of the other things I saw that was in here, again, that reinforced about, I think, about what the mayor was mentioning about intensity. Let's get back to that point. We had a bullet in here about what the consideration should be when we're developing the plan or the zone for it, was to decrease maximum building height to be more in line with surrounding residential development. So, this is complete, this application is inconsistent with that. Again, with the vision, maybe it fit the zone, but again, it may not have met the vision, of the master plan or its amendments.
I'll just add, now that I've had some conversation here, the other things is, obviously there's, like, and I think it was brought up when this first was right, like, there's 17 or 18 different sections of the TECD zone, and they say, well, we fit the one that we're permitted use because we're a warehouse, but all these other standards is what allows us to make sure that it fits within the scope of scale of what the master plan envisioned. You can't cherry pick out what you want to use and what you don't want to use, or just kind of say, well, we kind of have some of this, but not some of that. So yes, do they meet possibly some of the standards that are in the TDZ zone? I think they do. That's why they came in front of us, for us to see that. But just for example, I know that Mr. Mayor, you talked about that, the buffering requirement. How do you buffer a building that's 40 feet high, that's 80 feet above a house that you can't, I'm a tree guy, You can't put big enough trees in there in that buffering zone to hide that building from the neighbors looking out their backyard. There's no way. You're working against the earth. The lights, the noise are all going to come over that. So there is a buffering requirement. Yes, you may have meet the requirement that you put a buffer in as per the code, but it's a buffer that's not going to work. So it's not really a buffer. The purpose of a buffer is to give a adequate screening of noise and visual deterrent to the affected properties. And I don't think that they in any way can satisfy that at all, unless they lower the building 60 feet. So that's just one subsection of the requirement that Mr. Mayhew talked about. That yes, do they meet the code? They put a buffer up, but it's really doesn't meet the intent of what needs to be done.
You want to move on to the next time? You want to talk about traffic? Because I know we spent a lot of time.
You know, so the transitional district specifically says that uses with extensive lighting, signage, and traffic requirements are not intended for this district. And I think that's relative to the traffic testimony. Surely is. So, you know, we heard a lot about traffic. We heard a lot about level of service of intersections, and ultimately, I think it comes down to 322 trucks per day. I think that's something that at least Pannoni and the applicant, a number that was pretty consistent. While we still never nailed down the number of employees, I think in my review, I saw 3 or 4 numbers of how many cars were going to come in because of the number. Well, that was another number relative to the number of employees. But the trucks, the increase in trucks contributes to the intensity number. Again, we talked about the number of ways that intensity can be measured. You know, one of them is coverage, and that's the one that Ms. Cavone stuck to. But the other witness, planning witness, talked a little more about use and impact on the surrounding community, which is another element in our reexamination. Any non-residential development should be compatible with nearby residential neighborhoods. I think that ties in as well. So there, I'm kicking off the traffic discussion if anybody else wants to add to it. I think Mr. Dean, you know, stuck to his expert analysis and what he did. He may have strayed from it a little bit on a couple of comments he made, but as far as the number of vehicles and the service level, I mean, unfortunately, level of service D or E is acceptable. As ludicrous as it sounds, it is, because traffic is still moving, it's just not moving that fast. So, and I find it interesting that we can't talk about things off-site, but then we can talk about the level of service at 206. So, you know, he's a polished witness, but ultimately, I think he's leaving it up to us to determine if 322 trucks is going to fly. All of which go to 206. I'm sorry, truck trips. It was 161, right? All of which go to 206, all of which kind of flies in the face of what the bypass is supposed to do. So that's a starting point on traffic. If anybody wants to contribute, please do.
I think, you know, it's interesting, Committeeman, that you mentioned traffic and studies. I've been up here many years as well, and, you know, to your point, you know, the experts' testimony, you know, the numbers, the averages, the national, whatever, you know, you want to refer to the traffic studies are. The interesting thing is, you know, those, I guess, maybe in a real world, perfect scenario. So, as we all know, we're in September, school opened today, and that road is heavily traveled, east-west, high school students, kids, parents taking kids, and it changes. The traffic in Hillsborough, when school is in, changes, no matter what part of town you're in, because, we have the high school that's in early, and I can't even remember which school finally picks up their kids at like 8:40 or something like that, but from like 6:30 to like 9 o'clock, there's school buses and large school buses and going to the middle school and the elementary school, but that changes in September, and that ends in June. That road is pretty heavily traveled east-west because it's either that or Amwell Road. If you're going to the high school and you're on the east side, I refer to it as the east side of 206 where I live, those are really kind of your own options. You're not going down through Montgomery to come up 206 to get to the high school. You're traveling Amwell Road, or you're traveling, the roads. It's just heavily traveled. So, John, to your point about traffic, I just wanted to mention that. I'm sure we're all aware of that when we woke up this morning, and I don't have kids in school anymore, but for those of you that do, life in Hillsborough, as far as getting from one section of town to the other, changes a little bit with the additional traffic. So I wanted to mention that is something that, yes, you can look at the numbers and you can say, I'm going to have X amount of traffic, but now factor in that not only from students that are driving, parents that are driving, but the school buses. Obviously, that's the safety issue. We've all traveled that road. We've all gotten to the bridge. You can't see over the bridge on what's on the other side. God forbid there's somebody on a bicycle. There are people that do run that road early in the morning that are out there jogging and that sort of stuff. So just something I just wanted to mention.
So, yeah, the bridge is narrow, and it's a blind bridge. Obviously, Mr. Mayhew had concerns whether that bridge it's old and can handle the increased truck traffic, which there was never any testimony provided, nor was there any information provided by CSX who owns the bridge if they believe it can handle that kind of traffic. So that is a concern. Number two is, and I only know that 'cause I just came back from Europe, it's dark in the morning now again at 6 o'clock when the school buses start rolling to school. So, and then obviously it only gets worse as the fall comes and we lose a daylight. So you're traveling that road in darkness over a road with increased truck traffic. So it is becoming dangerous. It's a narrow road, as we know, with no shoulder. But also with the amount of truck, and there was a testimony provided by Mr. Mayhew, and I believe I asked the question to the engineer why they didn't decide to move flip the building around 180 degrees so at least the trucks aren't backing into the side of the building near the residents, which would mitigate the noise and the lights and everything else. And I think the answer was we didn't want to, or no. So there really wasn't a real concern for the residents as to what might help mitigate if there was a application that was approved, the noise from the increased traffic and the lights, which a buffering would have been more effective because it's almost the same level of the building, but they straight out just said no. But the road is, yes, we deemed it a TEC zone. I think that's what Mrs. Cafone said, and Mr. Dean, the township felt it was okay to have a Homestead Road with the zoning of that, but that wasn't the intent, again, of what we felt that road would need to have as far as use based on the T zone as an intermediate area or a transitional area with mostly automotive traffic or small delivery trucks, UPS, FedEx, that sort of thing that would associate with those businesses that were listed in the uses in the TEZ zone. So I lived on a road when the brick factory was active back in the 80s, Hamilton Road, and there were trucks that would go up and down my road every 4 or 5 minutes. They would come in, get loaded, and leave. That was all day long. So, and that's a narrow road. So I've witnessed what that kind of application is. Unfortunately, you just kind of lose the noise over time. It becomes white noise. It's like having a train in your backyard like I have now. Don't hear the people train at 4 in the morning. But it's still there. It's still a hazard, right? So with regards to the traffic, and Mr. Dean has the joke, a traffic engineer's never found a road that was unsuitable for the traffic they propose, or an intersection that couldn't handle the traffic that was proposed. But in due respect, again, we're dealing with, and I'm not an engineer, the respect to them with the ITE manual and innuendo and taking graphs and meeting X points. Like I was back in calculus where the two graphs meet at X and Y. This isn't a calculus. This is real life, right? We don't know what is actually coming. We don't know what times they're coming. We don't know if there are going to be trucks sitting queuing on the side of the road because they can't get into a dock because a guy showed up early. We don't know if the tractor trailer makes a wrong turn into the first warehouse and needs to go to the second warehouse, and now they come out and now have to make a left into the next one, because we talked about making no left turns, I think, out of the one, and they said, why? They're only coming into the warehouse that they need to. Well, we've seen in the news there's a lot of truck drivers on the road that can't read signs. Without getting too deep into the woods. Google Earth will take you wherever it feels it needs to take you, even down a road that's restricted to weight traffic. So the traffic is much more intense, to use the mayor's words, how we measure intensity, than I'm thinking that was envisioned in a TECD zone. 'Cause if you look at all the other principal uses that were on that, there wasn't nearly as much need for truck traffic in any of those uses. Warehouse happened to be the only one that would allow that kind of work, that kind of use. But then again, we didn't think the warehouse back in 20 whatever was what the warehouses became after the Amazon craze, right? And this isn't in an area that is off of 287 or 78 or East Windsor off the Parkway, where it's a direct on and off. These trucks have to travel through Manville, hello Mayor, through Hillsborough roads, down a road and into a warehouse that is directly in the center of our town, and then go back out. So 322 trips is not just 322 trips into the warehouse, but 322 trips through town.
Yep. And that, you brought up one of the inconsistencies, I think. The comment was that, by Mr. Dean, was that if the township governing body zoned the property as such, it must believe that the roads are able to handle it. But meanwhile, the applicant is going to improve the road along the entire course of the site. So if the road could handle it, why would they be widening the road as part of the application? To me, that just flies in the face. I think it's a cop-out, personally, that comment by him. I've heard it multiple times. I've never said it to his face, but next time I will. I think, again, they were improving the road only along that spot. And oh, by the way, not in front of where the house was, but every place else. So I find that an inconsistent bit of his testimony.
Kind of echoing Mr. Lapani was saying is, I was coming back from Pennsylvania last week with my wife, and we were driving up through Hopewell and into Montgomery, and we were on a really narrow road, and there was a tractor trailer in front of us, and I was saying to my wife, I said, honey, I don't think that guy is I think he's on the wrong road. And sure enough, about 10 seconds later, he brought down power lines and sparks all over the place, and it was mayhem. I don't think, these trucks are going to come out Homestead, make a left and a left, go down Hillsborough, hit the bypass. They're going to go where they're going to go. Also, to echo Mr. Wagner, we were talking about it's the school season now. Calculating these truck trips, using ITE and square footage and size, et cetera. But what the use of that warehouse may be, they may have their high season and low season, so we don't know if those 300 plus trips may be 400 or 500, or they may only be 100 or 50. We really don't know. But we have to, go with the information that we have at hand and make the best decision we can with the information we have.
As all my colleagues have just stated, the traffic is definitely a problem. I mean, it is not going to improve the conditions of the surrounding areas whatsoever. We already have a lot of traffic in Hillsborough. It will exacerbate that to a great deal. The pollution, again, now you're at 322 trips. That's a lot of pollution right there too, and that affects people's health, affects their sense of well-being, and that can't be dismissed. So yes, I mean that again, the word is transitional, and I think is a very important word in the description of that zone. And to go from 16 trips per day to over 300 per day, that's not transitional.
All right, well, okay. So I may be going off in a few different directions here because I had a lot of thoughts and read a lot, with the traffic and all. So I guess the first thing, just to kind of start off, the use of ITE, I mean, as it's been testified, it's just a book of data. It's to help spec applicants to try to guesstimate the service levels at intersections. I think that kind of brings back, and I think both of our professionals touched upon it, but I'm going to call it the wisdom of why we have an ordinance is we want full details of the business going in there so we know exactly what's happening. Now, whether or not there's already a tenant, there's nothing stopping the applicant to place requirements, guardrails, whatever we want to call it, on those operations. Could be days, hours, any type of restrictions they would on there. And I know, we have another one that all of a sudden made an offer to add some restrictions after the fact. But, so there is flexibility in that ordinance. We're not saying you must have a tenant, because obviously they come and go, but if you put restrictions onto what those operations are, and be, specific, we can get accurate understanding of the traffic. And I know one of the things, and now I'm going off on a tangent because it's a little bit, but it's related to traffic. I had asked straight up if there was going to be a security gate around there because, with most of these type of facilities, there's security to check. They're checking the seals on the back of those trucks, what's coming and going. And it was flat out, the applicant said there will not be any. So Mr. Dean did not take into account or did any studies about truck stacking, waiting to get in. Now, I don't believe a security wouldn't someday go there because, even if this was, to be approved with the condition of no security gates, there's nothing stopping future owners or, to come back. I need the security gates because otherwise I can't rent out this property. So you have to be very cautious as to, what you may be agreeing to along those lines. And I think that's a huge omission that Mr. Dean did not put in there as an option for us to consider because particularly with the, I don't know which one's the eastmost, warehouse one? the one that's closest to the road?
Close to the bridge?
No,
One. Building one is the big.
building one. Yeah, the one closest to the road, that's building one, right? Yeah, building one. Yeah, I think that one will have stacking there, and I think to take into account, I think what some of my colleagues have said, we've got narrow roads, we've got, now Howard traffic there, and, whether or not, you want to state their safety, there's going to be inconveniences in there. The roadway currently as it stands, does not take that into consideration. And again, getting back with the ITE, again, it's just a book of just data. There was a lot of discussions going on from both sides about statistics and correlations and what variables should be used, shouldn't be used. I mean, you could shake that up and get whatever results that you want. I think, and that's what happened, happen. I mean, to some extent, to both sides, decide what variables to use. But I think in Mr. Dean's case, he stuck to the one variable, that gave him the, a very good outcome that he had wanted to convey. I think there was even at one point he just kind of threw the whole concept of statistics out the door, whether there was correlation or not, and just said, I'm just plugging in data and getting my results. So I think right now, or, my view is, again, this goes back, again, to our requirement of, not, while we don't say no to spec, we basically state that we want spec and understand what's, coming in, so that, again, that we can accurately understand the impact of any application will have. In this case, we're going to talk about traffic on our roadways, the infrastructure itself, and of course, most importantly, is to the safety and welfare to the general public that is on those roads. You need a break now? Are we done with traffic? Okay, so we will take, we need 10? We'll take a 10-minute recess. We'll reconvene at 20 of. 20 of.
I would point out to the board that I'd ask you not to interact with the public, the applicant, or the objectors during the break, so that you're not accused of having been, or talk amongst yourselves.
There we go. Oh, okay. All right, we're back in session. All right. Okay. Commitment Lapani, I will let you lead off to the next.
I'm the leadoff
topic.
man.
Yep.
So we've kind of talked about things, so I'd like to talk a little bit about Mr. Mayhew's stormwater reports. In particular, which is most concerning, because I am not an engineer. I rely on you guys, but is the effect of the downstream flooding and the flow of water in peak and release, and the Royce Brook. So I'm going to ask Mr. Mayhew if he could just explain to me a little more in detail what your concern is on that, as far as the downstream flooding and the calculation.
Thank you, Mr. Lapani. I'm assuming you're talking about our review letter, page 3. It's the continuation of the comment began under stormwater management, comment 1 on page 2.
Yes.
And it's a long comment, but I guess the key point there is to discuss the total volume of runoff that will be generated by the project. Agencies and review agencies in particular nowadays look at 3 different parameters when you deal with stormwater. They look at peak rates, they look at the volume of runoff, and they look at the water quality. In this particular section of our review letter, we're discussing the volume of runoff. And because there is a significant amount of proposed impervious cover, there will be a significant amount of additional runoff. This is runoff generated because it can no longer infiltrate into the woods or meadow or fields. Now, applications can address that by creating significant infiltration facilities, whether they're bioretention or underground infiltration systems. And the applicant has proposed some, but even after taking into account the proposed infiltration structures on this site, there are significant increases in the total volume of runoff generated by this site. And that runoff has to go somewhere. It's going to go downstream on the tributary of the Royce Brook and work its way into the main branch of the Royce Brook and then into Mansfield Borough. And as we state in our review letter, and we included it as an exhibit, this stream has been studied by FEMA and has been identified with a floodplain. And that floodplain at certain road crossings is already impacting those roadways. And in our opinion, adding additional volume of runoff to those impacted roadways will increase the frequency of flooding of those roadways, and it will increase the time that those roadways are impacted. As an example, and most people are familiar, a storm event has a beginning, a peak, and an ending. And so sometimes roadways hit and flood a few inches for an hour or so, and then it recedes. But when you add more volume of runoff, the depth of that flooding will increase, and the time period that the roadway is flooded, in our opinion, will also increase. And so we believe that the applicant has not addressed the code which requires the applicant to minimize the amount of volume of runoff generated by the site. Does that help explain?
Sorry. So in your opinion, there is more engineering and retention required to mitigate the runoff?
Correct.
In retrospect to the large retaining walls and the underground biodetention basins also that you mentioned, that was there, then concerned about how that would affect the integrity of the walls. And I believe the testimony was that when Dr. Clay questioned, and they really hadn't engineered them yet. So how do we adequately understand if they are engineered correctly at this point?
Correct. That's discussed in our review letter as well. At the top of page 4, there's a proposed underground infiltration system that is very close to a proposed retaining wall. And as Dr. Emerson had pointed out, and as we pointed out, we have concerns about what would be the impact to the retaining wall if the ground area is saturated. Normally, when you build a segmental block retaining wall, you try to prevent the groundwater from saturating the retained side of the earth. And usually you provide drainage along the wall. But if that's done, then you're bypassing the groundwater infiltration. So certainly there would need to be more detailed design addressing how that's going to be handled.
Okay. And I'm also concerned, and you don't have to answer this, but in the cut and fill and the changing of the grade and how water is being moved and changed in its topography away from the wetlands and recharging there and directly into the Royce Brook, I think you mentioned also, is that something that would add to more flow into the Royce Brook because it's not having a chance to percolate into the wetlands properly?
That's a great question. And it may be helpful when you're reading that comment to refer to Exhibit C, as in Charlie. We marked up a plan. It's called Existing Drainage Area Map. And the blue and red text that you see on the plan are comments that were added by Pannoni Associates. As an example, as you're talking about, in fact, Mr. Lapana, you've talked about this tributary that runs between the two lots, sort of to the center of the site. That's called the Royce Brook Tributary C. And it runs from Homestead Road north towards the Royce Brook. Today, there's runoff approaching that tributary from the east and the west, from the fields and the woods. But the applicant's proposing to build building and roadway improvements with stormwater management, which will collect all the runoff and direct it to a detention basin at the rear of the site, which is the north end of the site, and then discharge it into the Royce Brook. So that stormwater flow is then bypassing the Royce Brook Tributary C, bypassing the wetlands that exist along that tributary, and we haven't seen an analysis to say that that wouldn't be impacting the natural habitat and the natural hydrology of that tributary. We have the similar concerns with the tributary B because a significant amount of runoff is collected for building number 2 and sending it directly to a detention basin at the rear northern corner of the site.
Thank you. So those are my concerns, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
I think maybe the comment I do want to make is that Mr. Ford did respond numerous times to comments. It was really an iterative process. I think in going through my review, I think 3 or 4 times he came back with another analysis, whether it was calculations or actual changes in the design, the civil design. So, one, I commend them for doing that, but it also leads me to question whether we're done, and whether he is done, and that there will be more to be addressed as this project would develop through the engineering process. So, again, I do think Mr. Ford went through the ringer and responded to a lot of changes, but therein is part of my, I don't want to say inconsistency, but part of what makes me uncomfortable is that we did go through that many iterations, and I believe there would be still more to come when it came to stormwater. So.
I'll just add a special thing, because obviously, in my opinion, we still haven't addressed or came to a conclusion on the stormwater buffer through the, I'll call the common ditch, or whatever the applicant would call it. That seemed to be in there from pictures back in the 50s, aerial photos. And whether it is classified correctly by us in our stormwater buffer versus what the applicant claims it is, whether it's man-made or not man-made. I believe the topography shows that it all kind of leads to that area. So I find it hard to believe that, and I've been here a long time, that wasn't there in some way or form in the past. The picture seemed to prove that. And again, it's all part of the overall ecosystem of that property. So I don't think that was, though the applicant feels it's been addressed, I don't know if our ordinance should take into effect on that.
Mr. Coyce, I just want to, I'm going back to your memo with regards to the Texas Eastern Pipeline. Can you just review how that, I don't want to call it, not interferes, but yeah, how the issue that correlates with our township code?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The code states in, let me see, C5, let me just get the full number. Section 188-75, C5, it states, the approving board may permit the encroachment upon the buffer provided for in this subsection upon a demonstration that the service application of this subsection would result in particular and exceptional practical difficulties or undue hardship caused by reason of exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of the property, or by reason of exceptional topographic conditions or physical features uniquely affecting a property, or by reason of extraordinary and exceptional situations uniquely affecting a property or the structures lawfully existing thereon. So the board would have to consider if the testimony that was provided meets those requirements for you to, as a board, grant a crossing.
Right. And I guess I'm going to be looking to Mr. Wagner. I think there's another one of from a era long time ago. This was one of our ordinances.
How many years you want to go back, Carl?
So, I mean, I know that we took this one, very seriously in getting it implemented, to, again, more from a public safety standpoint. I mean, if folks do remember, what went on in Edison.
I think that's what kind of brought it on.
Well, that's what, yeah.
Forget the name of the development that it destroyed, but
And I can't really recall us, looking to find, have opportunities to waiver that. I think that's one of the reasons why we wrote it, as strongly as we did. And I just can't recall, and I don't know if it's appropriate to ask Mr. Coyce, I just don't recollect us waiving this since it's been in place.
I don't recall.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have that. I don't have that information.
No, it's,
Yeah.
I mean, my recollection is we haven't waived this requirement.
Well, my advice to the board is, based on what I just read, you'd
Right.
have to then consider if the testimony that was provided by the applicant and the reasons why they're providing a second access point or an access point to cross over doesn't meet the standard for you to grant it.
Basically, have you heard testimony that indicates that this is the only way to cross?
Yeah.
Or that there is no other reasonable access permitted? Or that the undue hardship caused by not allowing the crossing is more problematic than the allowing of it? I would also indicate to the board that a little more confusion added to it is there's a section of that same, which is 188-75C2. And it comes into play because, as the board asked about what was or was not going to be in the proposed structures, C2 indicates no building or structure or part thereof which is used for the manufacturing, processing, generation, or storage of corrosive, highly toxic, oxidizing, pyrophoric, water-reactive, highly combustible, flammable, or explosive materials that constitute a high fire explosion or health hazard, including loose combustible fibers, dust, and unstable materials, shall be constructed within 125 feet of the right-of-way of any distribution, gathering, or transmission line. One of the rationales for knowing what potentially is going in the structures is to address the issue of whether or not the 125-foot buffer becomes an issue versus the 75. And the board has to, in its review, look at whether or not you've received sufficient information to address both the width of the right-of-way as well as the exception as to why the waiver needs to be granted. And it's my recollection, Mr. Chairman, the pipeline only comes into play on the,
Number 2.
on building, what we have euphemistically referred to as building number 2.
Right. So one of the things I'm kind of circling back to a little bit earlier this evening, just kind of some of the discussion that was centered around the completeness of applications and along those lines, and those who were around at the time. So, our prior planner, prior to Mr. Coyce, Mr. Maskey was the planner that had deemed this to be complete. One of the important factors in here, too, is Mr. Maskey was not the planner during the other era when we were doing the master plan amendments and the TDC zone. So, Mr. Maskey may not have been fully familiar, with the intents or views or wishes, of the Township Committee and Planning Board at the time. Now, I know for a matter of fact, for this application, I know he did not reach out to me to seek any counsel, at the time. Mr. Wagner, I don't know if you recall anything yourself, so.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to point out for the record that being deemed complete is just that. It's basically, have you met the requirements of the checklist, or do you potentially get a waiver from the requirements of the checklist? Having met the checklist doesn't mean that the board is therefore thereafter formally and completely forbidden from ensuring that provisions on the checklist, and not just the issue of what is or is not going to be in the application, but a myriad of other items that deem one complete, are still subject to board review and consideration, including many of the items that the board has discussed. I will point out, and applicant has given you a rather interesting set of responses to the issue of 18831E1, is that the code provision says the application must include, hopefully by the end of the hearing, a written description of the proposed uses and operations of the building, the number of employees or members of non-residential buildings, the proposed number of shifts to be worked and the maximum number of employees on each shift, the expected truck and tractor trailer traffic, the emission of noise, glare, vibration, heat, odor, air, and water pollution, safety hazards, and anticipated expansion plans incorporated in the building design. I believe the board, in hearing the testimony, has heard testimony on some of these rather extensively, some of these marginally or tangentially, and some of these not at all. And one of the issues, among many others, the board has to look at is to whether or not, in fact, it meets that provision of the code, along with many of the other issues raised by Mr. Coyce, Mr. Mayu, and the board. In a lull in the action, Mr. Chairman, I'll add one more item, if I may.
Certainly.
Lawyers are regularly accused of playing planners and engineers. Planners are regularly accused of playing lawyers and engineers. And engineers are regularly accused of playing lawyers and planners. If you recall, during the testimony of applicant's planner, Ms. Caffone raised the issue that the application meets the criteria under the municipal land use law, and she rattled off three. What she's talking about is a provision of the municipal land use law found at 40:55D-2, which we all tend to forget when we start to talk about these things, but the various letters that are set forth in that statute are what are euphemistically called the criteria, and she indicated that there were three. One was criteria G, one was criteria I, and one was criteria M. For purposes of the record, I would like to read into the record what they are. Criteria G under the statute to provide sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of agricultural, residential, recreational, commercial, and industrial uses and open spaces, both public and private, according to their respective environmental requirements, in order to meet the needs of all New Jersey citizens. Criteria I, to promote a desirable visual environment through creative development techniques and good civic design and arrangement. And criteria M states to encourage coordination of the various public and private procedures and activities shaping land development with a view of lessening the cost of such development and to the more efficient use of land. Those, according to applicant's planner, are the three bases under the municipal land use law why this application meets the MLUL. one of the issues the board has to review is whether or not any or all of them actually do.
I'm not a planner. I don't pretend to be one, but I design a visual environment. I don't think that that's quote-unquote been proven very well with talking about the buffer issues. Letter M, encouraging an efficient use of land. I'm not sure I buy that one too much either. So, I mean, it is our decision, right, to accept those rationales as a from their planner, right?
Well, you've been provided what their
What
planner
their-
believes are the
rationale, right,
rationales.
which we can accept nor.
You
or
can
not.
accept, reject, or raise a more than cautious or a not cautious eye, as the case may be.
Gotcha. And then, of course, obviously G about the size. I don't even want to talk about that one, but I will. Obviously, I said that I think in the beginning of my testimony that the whole purpose of moving the lot line was to make the size bigger, as opposed to taking the existing lot line and make a smaller property. So, yeah, you can justify that you can move a line to make something larger, but I don't necessarily justify the visual impact or encourage the efficient land use for this property. Again, I'm not a planner, but I think they're stretching.
I'm struggling a little bit with the concept of us trying to come up with quantitative measures for, let's say, intensity and usage and proving with metrics and numbers. But what you just read is very qualitative, subjective. And I say I'm struggling with it because as an engineer myself, you want to have some metrics. You want to have something you can go with, the 322 trucks a day. So, what was just the gauntlet that's laid down there flies in the face of that. So which do you pick? You pick the qualitative, you pick the quantitative, you pick a little of both. And so having your cake and eat it too, use every proverb you want. Having to address all three of them specifically, should we or shouldn't we? I think we've talked around them already on the dais on those criteria. I note in one of her reports, I said, on what basis was this made? Just qualitative opinion. There was no analysis. It's just a gratuitous sentence that says this application meets all the requirements of the TECD and master plan. But then to say that we can't, if we choose to reject it based on what the master plan says, flies in the face of that testimony. So, like I said, I kind of struggle with, not struggle, I embrace it, for that matter. Should I do it now?
I got a couple more.
All right.
But kind of going back, I think that's why we may have purposely made the language as is to be
Qualitative?
qualitative, so that it provided some flexibility. But I mean, there's a lot of judgment there.
I wrote this 3 years ago, qualitative and quantitative. It's still here. So,
The board is ostensibly asked to listen to the testimony provided by applicants' professionals, by your professionals, by objectors' professionals where applicable, by the public, and basically weigh them. You are not planners, even though some of you are engineers, you are not the engineer in this case. You bring certain understandings of what the application is and where the application fits within but you are also well within your purview to rely on the comments and recommendations of your own professionals, and I'm leaving myself out, mostly, because, as I said, I only play engineer and planner, you know. But that's what you're required to do. You're required to balance all of the factors and use your own knowledge and experience in being a board member and being a resident in this town, and come up with your own conclusions without necessarily accepting, or you can accept some things, reject others, and find others to be problematic, and come to a conclusion without having to necessarily have an absolute.
So, I mean, I guess, you know, one of the other things I just kind of, again, want to go back to when this was all originally, you know, the amendment was done back in 2010, the ordinance in 2011. Well, let me take this back. There was a lot of discussion early on in this application about, again, about defining what a warehouse is. Obviously, that term, you know, we got creative, pulled a lot of things out, some dictionaries I never knew existed, you know, with their definitions. But, yeah, again, when the ordinance was created, you know, it was really with what warehouses were perceived for a community like Hillsborough in 2011. I think, you know, the fulfillment centers or large-scale distribution centers or just large-scale warehouses were left to the likes of on the Turnpike. And I alluded to earlier that, you know, maybe another time, another place, if, you know, those that were, you know, the powers that be actually, you know, may have ran the Somerset Highway through here, the 95 extension. Again, this might have been a different story. That application may have been here, you know, 15 years ago, but it didn't. So, yeah, I was looking here to see, you know, again, I had a very open mind during this process to see if I, you know, if any of the testimony would have given me a different perspective. And again, I'm going to go back to Ms. Cofone, I think was, you know, really had that ability to play the impact, and based on her testimony and again, where she didn't go or avoid it, you know, I think, and Mr. Wagner, may, you know, perhaps for yourself too, it reinforced, you know, the vision we had, you know, and it hadn't really had changed, or we were not, I don't know what I call it, yeah, just hadn't changed. The other thing I just kind of want to mention, getting back to the lot line adjustment, and again, when the master plan was amended, and making recommendations for the zone, and what was taken into consideration, you know, it was a handful of properties. And I think the zone was developed with the lot lines as they were established. So, kind of going along those lines, you know, I think what Commissioner Lapani was saying, that, you know, that there was really a different intent for having the lot line adjusted than what is traditionally done, or traditionally for. That I don't think any of the properties, you know, whether these two specifically or any that are in the zone, are undevelopable, you know, as the ordinance is written today. So, anybody else want to chime in? I think you're itching. You're scratching.
Well,
Good?
yeah.
Okay.
You know, having considered testimony, everything that advice of counsel on that last item, correspondence, various professional reports, testimony up here, or comments from colleagues on the dais, our professionals, who we have to rely on as well, Pannoni's report, our planning director. I'll acknowledge that even in the Pannoni report, the applicant did satisfy many comments. They went through a lot of work, responded to a lot of things.
However, I believe there remain enough questions and inconsistencies as we've discussed up here. Those include the buffer issue, stemming from the TECD zone itself. You have to move the lot line to fit this, one of these warehouses into the zone, and a lot of the comments come out of that. I don't believe it's transitional. It's a transitional in the wrong direction. We talked about the intensity of it from a lot of perspectives, building height, the traffic impact. By the way, the 322 apparently doesn't change if you only operate 10 hours a day, based on the statistics. So think about that. The noise and pollution factors, we didn't hear testimony on that. There was a report, but nobody testified to it. The size and scale factors, as illustrated by our planning professional. We have a spec building where we don't know really the number of employees, the actual number of vehicles that are going to be there. There are still questions on stormwater. Now, the inconsistency on hydrological impacts on tributaries is something that also needs to be explored, and that's a significant stormwater issue. Routing of trucks to 206 defeats the purpose of the bypass. Putting this warehouse in the center of town, as Committeeman Lapani mentioned, defeats that purpose. It's counter to being compatible with neighborhoods, the peace and solitude of residents and neighborhoods around there. And for that reason, I'm going to make a motion that we deny the application.
We have a motion.
Mayor, you were very detailed, as an engineer would be, in summarizing the things, but I'd like to just add that the underlying theme here is, and I think that Mayor's is just, it is too big, too massive, too many problems, too it's like they just, instead of coming in with an application that fit the scope and scale of what could fit there and be harmonious with the neighborhood and still be a good building, they decide to go for the biggest building they could find and jam it in there. That doesn't happen often, but I believe it happened in this point, and it created way too many problems that I believe their engineers could adequately address to ease the residents and the township of the concerns and the neighboring neighborhoods, that it would not be problematic down the road. Because we don't know what's here today, if we should approve it, what's also here 20 years from now. Also, some of the engineering flaws that were mentioned by Mr. Pannoni, by Mark in the Pannoni report. Crossing a pipeline, obviously, it has a concern for safety reasons, but I believe that in the best interest of the safety and welfare of the population of Hillsborough, not just that live in this neighborhood, but for all of Hillsborough, and the harm it would bring to this community, I second the motion.
Is there any additional comments? Thoughts?
This is based, Mr. Chairman, on all of the discussions that the board has had this evening. It's questions and comments during the proceedings, the letters from them, recommendations from their professionals, and the testimony that you've heard and the exhibits you've reviewed. Is that correct, Your Honor? Is that the intent of your motion?
I don't use the word all, but yes.
that the intent of your second, Mr. Lapani?
Affirmative.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no additional comments from board members?
And just instruct what a yes means and what a no means, Mr.
A yes is to
Counselor.
deny the application, a no is to approve the application, or at least not approve the
Deny.
the motion to deny.
It wouldn't, no would not be an approval, it just means,
No is
No.
not an approval of the application, no is a rejection of the motion. And Mr. Flagg obviously cannot vote since he is not eligible.
right, but we appreciate him hanging out. Okay, so all board members clear on what a yes versus no?
So, one more time, Mr. Bernstein.
A yes would be to approve the motion to deny the application. A no would be to reject the motion to deny the application, but does not in and of itself grant an affirmance. That would take a separate motion or no action.
Thank you.
Last chance, everyone's clear? Okay, with that, may I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Committeeman Lapani?
Yes.
Mayor Chicarelli?
Yes.
Vice Chair Peason?
Yes.
Chair Sirachi?
Yes. Okay, so the
Motion
motion
carries.
carries, the application's denied.
Mr. Chairman, we will complete the resolution and get a draft copy to the board members in advance of the necessary time frame to meet the requirements for the adoption of the resolution, which will begin
Okay, and
October,
when would we have to have that in front of us?
by the October meeting.
By the October meeting? Okay. Okay, so with that, just to let everyone know, we do have a meeting next week, September 11th at 7 PM. Please let the planning office know if you're unable to attend, make sure we do have a quorum. And with that, I will entertain a motion of adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Good night, everybody.
It's also David's birthday next Thursday.
Whose birthday? 29?
Stay late.